All right, welcome everyone to today's user group meeting. Today being the 16th of November, the Adelaide Office 365 user group. Let me just go over to this one. And why isn't that moving? There we go. My name's Daniel Brown. You've probably seen me via email or your social media advertising the Adelaide Office 365 user group. I've been around for quite a while. A little bit about me on the screen. To elaborate more on the Office 365 user group, we meet on the third Tuesday of each month, February through to November. So we're always on the lookout for more sessions, although 2022 is already starting to be packed up. Even if it's a 15-minute local session or something that you've made or want to showcase, always happy to show off something that's very cool to make your life easier in O365 and share that knowledge around. Or we can do longer sessions, as everyone's aware, sort of the 30 to 60-minute range. 45 minutes seems to be a good sort of time frame. And we were founded in March 2008 as originally the Sharepoint user group, but we've evolved into the Office 365 user group, and we cover much more than SharePoint these days. What do we cover? Pretty much anything in the O365 stack and anything that's related, but mainly focusing on Office 365, SharePoint, Power Apps, Forms, Flows, Power Automate, and obviously bits and pieces of Azure that we interact with, and we cover a wide range of topics. Business, sales, development, and industry topics. Like today, we've got Dan, who's going to provide some great information, and then we've got a deep dive session with the Cam as well to look at Microsoft Graph. So we can certainly cover a wide depth there. A little bit about the Australian Computer Society. I'm going to give this a plug every month because I still think it is worthwhile to have a look at and certainly to be familiar with. It is the peak industry society for ICT. It's constantly doing things in bits and pieces. Definitely worthwhile checking out. The user group today offers 1.5 hours of CP hours, professional development hours, to go towards your certification membership. Check it out. It's certainly worthwhile if you do. Have a look. A little bit of news. Microsoft Viva goes into general availability a few days ago now. If you're not familiar with it, you're probably going to get familiar with it this afternoon. It's a very exciting product, and I've noticed that now my Outlook has got an next additional button there, so it's finally come through in my main tenancy, so that's great. So we'll probably have a look at that today, and we'll hear more from Dan on the topic of that. But worthwhile checking out, even if it's just a 5-minute, to have a look at the link below, just to make sure you're familiar, because it is available now. So that means your users are probably being exposed to it if you haven't gone to turn it off. But it's worthwhile getting ahead of the curve on that. SharePoint Server Subscription Edition also went into general availability. This would be the evolution of SharePoint on-Prem. Pretty much, if you're using SharePoint on-Prem, I would recommend still going to the cloud. But those scenarios, I would probably recommend, if you do have requirements to remain on-Prem, definitely worthwhile looking at SharePoint Server Subscription to bridge that gap or to fulfill those requirements. Because unfortunately, while everything is very cloud-based and the cloud is great in many ways, there are sometimes requirements where data can't be in the cloud. So worthwhile checking it out. I've been banging on about this for quite some time now. Internet Explorer is dead. If you're not familiar with it, please get familiar with it. There are plans, there are guidelines, there are ways forward, mainly because of the support. Now, moving forward, as you can see, on August, all supported apps in M365 killed support for IE11. Moving forward, it's all going to be Microsoft Edge. Plan your deployment. I'll put up these slides as well. There's plenty of links around. Moving forward, though, the main sort of impediments that I've seen have been the map drives. So certainly, the migration path for that is OneDrive for Business. The Explorer view, same deal, OneDrive for Business. Line of business applications, well, they're going to require various updates and tweaks. There are some ways you can get around it for now, but unfortunately they will have to be updated. Same with like toolbars and extensions. So any of your traditional toolbars, as you remember back in the day with all the users, they'll have to be updated to work somewhat better with Edge rather than IE, just to make that transition smooth. SharePoint 2010 support, I've also been going on about this because I still see it around. We need to get off SharePoint 2010 and look to the future with it. Excuse me. There's various details on migration paths forward. Microsoft did extend support for it, but now that it's well and truly past its life cycle, it's time to end and move forward. The migration path, obviously preferred one, is O365 and get onto SharePoint Online and take advantages of the cloud. 2013, also, we're only like 2 years away, not even now, 18 months. Start planning now for that migration and moving forward, because SharePoint obviously is, or can be, a beast within the organizations, housing a lot of content and data and information. So we should start the planning process sooner rather than later. As I said, it sort of looks like, it doesn't look like end of support will end on the 14th of the 7th in 2026. So while we're only 5 years away for 2016 and 2019 support, I would definitely be putting that on the radar within sort of the next 12 months to start that process. Just as a quick update, Microsoft, as of July, also passed 250 million monthly users. So that was cool. I did have a look today for the latest figures, but couldn't find any of the latest published ones. But that's very cool. 250 million monthly active users. So that's very, very cool. Also, as you know, Windows 11 has gone general availability as well. So I've been using it now since it come through on the dev channels, the alpha, and been playing with it and have it all on all of my devices now. I think business is really going to love it. People are going to love it. It's fresh, it's new, it looks great. And yeah, center is better in my opinion. I definitely love the taskbar in the center. Roadmaps, definitely check out the roadmaps. We've got the blogs as well for the SharePoint O365. They will come together. The roadmap's definitely worth checking out. What's been published, what's coming, what hasn't been made a feature as well, because sometimes that's also important to see. But also check out what's coming in the future, and things can turn on, turn off, and give the users abilities. Sometimes abilities we do not want to have, but we just want to get ahead of first. Microsoft Press discount. We've still got the user group discount going on for ebooks and hardcovers. So please use those codes. Freely available for user group members to do. Looking forward to 2022. I've got a few names there. I'm still confirming everything. Obviously, it's a bit far out, but I've got a few speakers there that have said yes and have committed to a user group. So we've got Cameron as well there in March. He's put his name down. We will confirm, obviously, as the time gets closer. I mean, we're still quite some time out from 2022, but as a sort of temporary lineup of actually what's coming up. Let me just pause. Local groups also around Adelaide. We've got various .NET user group, the data and analytic groups, which was the former Microsoft SQL Server group, Power BI group, Dynamics, and various Azure user groups, Pete, and IT Pro, and also the ACS common and the special interest groups. We are also on various social media platforms. The two most active is, once it decides to flip over, Facebook and LinkedIn. LinkedIn being the primary one. Facebook, we've certainly got a presence there, but LinkedIn being the primary one. So today, first off, we have Dan Holme. I can never get that right. Sorry, Dan. About connecting and engaging with people with Viva Connections, SharePoint News, and Yammer communities. I will let Dan introduce himself, but I've known Dan for some years, and I think this is the first time you've presented to the user group, so I really do appreciate taking your time. And given the time zone difference, also, it's a big, very appreciative if you're giving up your time, Dan. So I will hand over to you now. And are you able to present and all of that?
We'll give it a shot. Hey, everybody. Let me try sharing and make sure it's all looking good. Before we go further. Let's see here. won't actually often share from the browser, so get the new UX here. Let's see. I don't think I need audio, so we'll skip that. All right, are you seeing a slide?
Looking good.
Yep, looking good.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks to the technical difficulties, we do have a fairly small group today, so I'm actually happy to approach this in any way that is going to be the most valuable for you all. So for those of you who have not met yet, my name is Dan Holme, and I'm a principal product manager lead for Microsoft 365. I work in the Yammer team, and my team is responsible for integrations of Yammer into Teams and Outlook. We're also cooking a very cool new feature that we will announce first quarter next year. And before that, I was director of marketing for SharePoint, OneDrive, Yammer, Stream, Microsoft Search, and what became Microsoft Viva. And so I thought I came today prepared to share with you a look at particularly how Microsoft Viva, SharePoint, and Yammer come together to power engagement across the organization, to share a view of what it looks like for those of you who haven't had a chance to play with it yet, and to share an overview of how to get it deployed in an organization. But I'm actually happy to deviate from that script. I'm yours for today. So if you want to just ask questions, if you want me to speed through the presentation, then we can spend more time on questions. I'm really kind of open to whatever makes most sense. Daniel, I don't know if you've got any particular thoughts.
Yeah, I'm open to whatever format everyone's open to as well. I mean, if you've got your presentation, Dan, run through it, and anyone's got any questions or queries, if you're happy to answer them. I think we've just got a chat notification. That one. Oh no, sorry, no, temporary one. Sorry, everyone. Different noises. But yes, I'm happy if people just want to raise their hand or ask questions directly. I don't think there's a need to sort of be muted the whole time. If you want to have a chat or explore a topic with Dan or Cameron, so if you're comfortable with that, gentlemen, I am.
Cool. And then Cameron, you're up in, is it half an hour, or do we have 45 minutes for the first section?
I think 45, but
Cool.
As long as Cameron's cool, maybe 5 minutes plus or minus.
Oh, I won't go longer. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't interrupting Cameron's time as well.
No problem.
Awesome. So I'll sort of give you the abbreviated, some of the abbreviated speed through version of this, so that we can really dig in and answer questions for the folks who are here, and see what it is you're interested in talking about. So obviously, it goes without saying that we've all been through a lot the last year, and the 18 months. And we know that we've been working to transform our physical workplace into a digital workplace, and we've gone through massive amounts of transformation. And before I say anything else, it's really important for me to say thank you to you all. You're the ones who are on the front line, who are either helping your organizations survive and thrive during these challenging times, or you're helping our common customers. And everything you've done to help our society and our organizations, our institutions, our families adapt is so valuable to us. And we really, really want to thank you for everything you do as influencers, as implementers. And the scope of the disruption we've experienced has, of course, been completely mind-blowing and can't be overstated. This disruption has influenced our businesses, our supply chains, our markets, and of course, our people. And one of the things we at Microsoft have been doing over these last 19 months is asking questions and looking at data to try and understand what has been happening and what it means for us moving forward. And we at Microsoft don't have all the answers, but we certainly have a lot of questions, and we have implemented research of our own. We are able to look at telemetry from our customers. We're able to look at what our own employee base at Microsoft is experiencing, and we're able to conduct research with partner organizations like Harvard Business Review and others. And what we've learned is really 3 major lessons coming out of this pandemic. The first is hybrid work is here to stay, and that's not going to be news to anyone. But it is critical that we all understand that the workplace will never be what it was before the pandemic. Second, that the people of our organizations is really what got us through this pandemic. It's people that power the agility of our organizations and allow us to be resilient. And we've really come to understand how important it is not only to empower people, but also to make sure that they are able to be their best in a sustained way. That is people-centric and gives people what they need to be their best. And third, that coming out of this pandemic, we're all experiencing this shift in the workforce that many call the Great Reshuffle, where people will be reevaluating their work-life balance, what it means for them to work. And we're definitely seeing people actively seeking new opportunities for a more integrated balance of work and life. And with these transitions in mind, leaders that we're all working with in our organizations and in our customers have to start applying a growth mindset and thinking about how do we move forward with these learnings, what's next? And we believe that what's next is a new workplace, a workplace that's not only physical, but also digital. That's not just hybrid, but that's flexible and really lets people work when, where, and how they want to work. A workplace that's not just inclusive, but is people-centric. And so when organizations are investing in tools to make these things happen, because they need to unlock the best of their people and support their people to achieve the goals of the organization. So we're seeing customers invest in hybrid workplace tools that allow them to create equitable experiences for people to get work done regardless of place, time, or modality. These are tools like Microsoft Teams, meetings, and of course you saw at Ignite, we're investing in entirely new ways of bringing people together in the metaverse, as well as ways of sparking creation even before the traditional document would come into play through things like Microsoft Loop. And so these tools are important to empower people and organizations to transform. But for those tools to be effective, we also have to invest in the culture of our organizations, in the people themselves. And your people will thrive and succeed where culture, communications, engagement really support the organization's mission. So we see customers starting to recognize that culture really guides people's behaviors. It establishes shared values. It sets up systems of belief and reinforcement that guide that behavior. Communications clarify vision and progress towards shared objectives, and engagement really activates people to be their best selves. And there's this really interesting virtuous cycle of strategy, culture, communications, and progress towards shared objectives that accelerates agility and innovation and builds resiliency. And that cycle has really been slowed during the pandemic when these connections in an organization were reduced. So while organizations are investing in these people-centric tools like Microsoft Teams to help people collaborate and work together, they're also investing in tools to foster connections between people and each other, between people and the organization. And that's what we'll focus on today in this discussion, is how we can keep people informed and engaged and supported to really be their best in an organization. So that's sort of the framing before we get into the product. And I want to spend the rest of this time really looking at the products and what they bring to the table. Any thoughts, questions? Does this resonate with you all? I think we're getting a little bit of noise in the background too. So if you're not, if you don't have questions, please do mute. And because I'm presenting, I can't necessarily see chat. So if you've got a question, please feel free to come off chat and ask.
I've just checked chat. We've got nothing in chat, Chancev. But yeah, feel free to come off mute and have a chat. But yeah, if you not, please just mute that mic.
Awesome. All right, so let's take a look at several of our tools and get into the product. And we're going to start with Viva Connections, and then we'll talk about SharePoint, Yammer. We'll look at how to deploy these tools successfully in your organization, and I'll lead with a few resources. So last February, we launched Microsoft Viva, which is our employee experience platform. And the goal of Microsoft Viva is really to empower people and teams to be their best by integrating employee experiences into the apps people are using every day, into Teams and into Outlook. We launched Viva with 4 modules. Insights, which brings together workplace analytics, My Analytics, and Glint to provide qualitative and quantitative insights that make you able to take care of your well-being and manage your time more effectively, that help managers ensure the success and well-being of their teams, and help leaders improve organizational productivity and well-being. Then Viva Topics, that organizes and centralizes knowledge around shared topics and delivers that knowledge in the apps people use every day. Viva Learning, which brings together learning from Microsoft sources and from third-party content and learning management systems to structure and bring learning into the flow of work. And finally, Viva Connections, which is where we'll spend our time focusing today. And then just before Ignite, we announced the acquisition of Ally.io. And Ally is focused on helping individuals and teams chart out and manage progress towards shared objectives, towards goals. So that module will be coming online over the coming months. And at Ignite, we announced the general availability of Viva. We announced pricing for the Viva Suite. And we announced the general availability of Viva Connections, which is now available on desktop and mobile in 27 languages and is included with Microsoft 365 and Office 365 subscriptions. So one of the great stories about Viva Connections is that it's no extra charge. It's there for customers to start using today and to integrate into Microsoft Teams. So Viva Connections, the goal of that experience is to give people a place where they can go to connect with each other and with the organization. And it gives the organization a place to shape culture and foster connections and really drive a modern employee experience all inside of Microsoft Teams. This slide is what I would consider to be the money slide for Viva Connections. This is, if you're not familiar with Viva Connections, this is what you and your organization really need to know about it. It's one place to connect with your organization, to find out what's going on, to tap into news and conversation and resources. It's a place that the organization can brand to reflect the look, the feel, the identity of the organization with the organization's logo and theme. It's personalized to you. So every employee can find relevant content thanks to AI using signals from the graph to deliver information, resources, and conversations from across the organization. It is tailorable. So the organization can tailor the experience for targeted employee groups. So frontline workers might have a different experience than people in other regions or roles. And you can add custom components that really enrich the employee experience using no-code configurations or with developer frameworks like the Sharepoint framework. Very importantly, Microsoft is not trying to build employee experience all by itself. We're integrating and incorporating the tools that customers already are using today. So customers can integrate investments in partner solutions like Workday and ServiceNow, and they leverage, Viva Connections leverages all of the investments you've already made in SharePoint, Yammer, Stream, Teams, and Microsoft 365 security, identity, and compliance. So I personally believe that Viva Connections really delivers the promise of the cloud. We're now able to deliver a new innovative experience that doesn't require you to migrate from a legacy platform to a new platform, that doesn't require you to throw out the old in order to get the new. We're taking customers forward by building upon the investments they've made already. So I'm going to give you a quick tour of Viva Connections. And as I do it on desktop and mobile, I want you to, if you're not familiar with Viva Connections already, I want you to look at 3 things. Viva Connections really heroes out with 3 components: the feed, the dashboard, and resources. And we'll take a look at them in real time here. We'll start on mobile, where you can really clearly see these 3 experiences. So here we are in Teams on mobile, and I'm able to see my Teams experience. The first app is Viva Connections. It's been branded for my organization, and I see a dashboard, feed, and resources. The dashboard includes applications that surface information and resources from across the organization, such as a health check that allows me to check in before I enter a facility and verify that I am not experiencing COVID symptoms, for example. We see cards that come from other Viva modules, from other aspects of Microsoft 365, and custom cards that can be created with simple frameworks like adaptive cards and sophisticated developer frameworks like Sharepoint framework. Next is the feed. This is the personalized feed of news and information that lets me tap into what's going on across the organization. I can view, I can engage, I can comment on news and conversations right within Viva Connections. And as I back out, I'm still within the context of Connections, and I can continue engaging and scrolling through my feed. We see, for example, there's featured news and conversations coming from our leadership, conversations coming from people in my organization that are close to me. And I can see what's happening. And if there's something that I want to come back to later, I can save it for later. We'll see a band of news that I've saved for later. And I can also tap into the save for later functionality at the top of the screen. So the feed really lets me get an overview of news, announcements, and information from across the organization. Finally, there's resources, and resources is about linking me to any resource on our digital estate, whether it's on SharePoint or any URL. My organization can create a navigation that lets me get to those resources across the digital estate. And then I'm able to tap right back in and continue on with the flow of my work in chat, for example. So we really see this dashboard, this feed, and these resources lighting up right inside of Teams, allowing me to connect with people and the organization without having to break the flow of my work. Now we'll see the exact same thing on desktop here, where we have more real estate. So here in Teams, we have a personalized application, in this case, branded for the sample organization Relic Cloud. I'm able to see a beautiful employee experience built on modern SharePoint, very visual. And we'll take a look through each of the elements of this experience again, starting with the feed, the news and conversation and information that's coming from across my organization, personalized for me based on AI and Microsoft Graph, and connecting me with everything I need to know. Then on the right-hand side, you'll notice the vertical panel has the dashboard. Very much like we saw on mobile, I see a dashboard, I see cards. Those cards aren't just information, they're applications, so I can tap in and schedule time off, for example, right within my dashboard. And that navigation, those resources. If I tap another time on the app in the app bar, I'll see the navigation appear, and I can navigate through those resources in my organization. So we've seen how Viva Connections brings a dashboard, a feed, and resources to me across mobile and desktop. Again, the experience can be tailored for me based on whether I'm an information worker or a frontline worker, for example. And you as an organization can integrate all of the custom applications and third-party applications that you already use. As one example, we released a new Power App that is an updated return to work application, allowing people to upload their vaccination and test results to allow people to return to work safely. So that's a real quick look at Viva Connections. I will point out that in the Connections feed, SharePoint News popped up many times there, and SharePoint News is a key player in the feed. If you haven't had a chance to experience SharePoint News yet, it's definitely something worth putting in play in your organization. It's super easy for any user or communicator to create a new news article, make it look great, and publish it to your organization, have it surface inside of SharePoint, inside of Viva Connections. And I'm going to skip the detailed demo of that because I think most of you are familiar with that already. So SharePoint News is one of the key elements of the feed. Another key element of the feed is Yammer conversations. In fact, Yammer powers the majority of content in many of our customers' Viva Connections feed. So any announcements that are coming from communities, including all companies, featured conversations, announcements from communities you follow, are all going to show up inside the feed and really bring that feed to life so that there's dynamic, really relevant personal information for you in the feed in addition to your organization's news. So that's a quick view of Viva. Before I say a few words on Yammer, I'd love to find out if there are any questions about Viva and answer those. And then we'll do a quick overview of Yammer, and then we'll look at how to deploy these. Any questions? I'm coming back to the chat here. I don't see any. Anyone want to jump off chat?
If anyone, feel free to unmute and chat or talk, or if anyone's got any questions. I think we're good, Dan.
All right.
Yep,
we'll keep
cool.
going then. So while Viva Connection is the new kid on the block and brings a lot of value to customers by bringing together the content, the news content from Sharepoint and the conversational content from Yammer, those underlying services are still there powering that feed. And one of the most high value services we have in Microsoft 365 is Yammer, which connects and engages people across the organization. And during the period of the pandemic, Yammer's usage has skyrocketed. We have seen customers really coming to understand the importance of being able to connect people, not just in their work groups, not just in their meetings, but across those work groups and across the organization to drive very important business objectives, to drive community and discovery. In other words, keeping people aware and connected with what's happening across the organization, harnessing knowledge, answers, and ideas, because in a small working group, you don't have all the knowledge, you don't have all the answers, and you need to be able to reach out beyond the borders of those working groups to capture those. And finally, being able to communicate and align people across, communicate with and align people across the organization. So that's Yammer's role in the suite. And prior to the pandemic, we had gone through a period of time where we reinvented Yammer and brought it into Teams, into Outlook, into SharePoint, and now into Viva across Windows Desktop, Android, iOS. So customers can really take advantage of Yammer superpowers wherever they work. You no longer have to go to Yammer to experience the value of these scenarios. So over the pandemic, customers really started tuning into the importance of these scenarios, because the pandemic, by making everyone remote, completely broke the hallway experiences, the water cooler experiences, those serendipitous experiences where people were able to connect with each other, to feel like they belong to something greater than themselves, to overhear conversations and say, oh my gosh, that's something I can contribute to, or that's something that can be valuable in my work. And that allowed the organization to really keep people aware and aligned of what was going on in the organization. So Yammer has become an increasingly critical foundational element for our customers in their employee experiences. And you will certainly be hearing over the coming weeks that the capabilities of Yammer, the community scenarios, and that the values, the value that customers have found in Yammer over the past 18 months are central to and foundational to Microsoft Viva. And when I talk to customers about Yammer, I find there's two major things that can really help them understand how Yammer fits into employee experience and into their organizations. The first is the scenarios that Yammer fulfills, and those are here on this slide. Normally, I would go into details on each of these, but I'm gonna open up. I'm gonna save some time for questions here, so I'll cover them quickly. Fostering community, conversation, and discovery is what creates a social fabric in an organization. It's what connects people beyond their core working groups to really understand what else is happening in the organization and to have resources to connect to and engage with outside of their working groups. It's particularly critical in larger organizations, but even in smaller organizations, people need to feel like they belong to the mission of the organization and need to feel included in the direction and work streams of the organization. The second broad set of scenarios is around harnessing knowledge. As the workforce churns and people leave the organization, they take knowledge with them. As new people come on board, they hunger for the knowledge that they need to be effective quickly. And so it's critical that we have tools that enable people to contribute their knowledge, to capture that knowledge, and then to connect with that knowledge when they need it. And that knowledge, again, is generally held by people beyond the borders of individual working groups. And third, communicating and engaging at scale. So if you understand those scenarios, those are best done by Yammer in Microsoft 365, which leads to the second big thing that I find customers ask me, which is in a world where people are working in Teams or in Outlook, what role does Yammer play? And my answer to that is it plays the same role. It powers those scenarios, But in the past, we'd asked people to leave Teams, to leave Outlook, to go to Yammer for those scenarios. And now with our integrations, you can experience these scenarios right inside of Teams. The Communities app, which is available inside of Teams, any user, any administrator can deploy it, and now is coming to Outlook as well, allows people to connect with their communities inside these apps that they're doing their core collaborative work in. So it's no longer a separate place to go to, a separate thing to think about. It's just part of their work. And Yammer inside of Microsoft is being positioned and is being leveraged as the way of connecting people at scale across working groups and across the organization. So I promise, will be seeing more and more of Yammer showing up inside of Teams, inside of Outlook, and inside of Microsoft Viva. So by supporting these scenarios on Yammer today, your investment is safe, and you'll see that investment grow and be leveraged into new experiences and capabilities within Microsoft 365. And I'm happy to talk about that more later, but I wanted to at least cover that. The final major topic I wanted to share with you was a look at how to implement these experiences in your organization, sort of really get into the tech and the IT pro side of how this is done. So I'm going to share with you 9 steps to deploy a modern employee experience with Viva Connections, supported by SharePoint and Yammer. I'll do this at a fairly fast clip, but I'm happy to go into more details on any of these. Let's start by visualizing how these experiences come together. So Yammer conversations happen in communities, and you as an individual user can certainly tap into those using Yammer or using the Communities app in Teams or in Outlook. And SharePoint News has been going on for quite some time as well, but in the past has been contained to your intranet or to your SharePoint sites or mobile application. Now these 2 sets of content come together into a single feed. And that feed will present itself to you across Microsoft 365, including in Viva. But there's going to be far more information in that feed than any one user should be expected to stay on top of. So we help you as a user, and we help the organization ensure that the right information gets to you and doesn't overwhelm. And one of the ways we do that is with targeting. So SharePoint News supports audience targeting, meaning I can publish a news article and specify which group of employees that's most important to. And similarly, in Yammer, your communities effectively target content to members of that community. So by the time the feed shows up in your SharePoint home site, for example, in the feed web part, that feed has been personalized for you. What's going to show up in that feed is based on your role, your geography, the job you do, your time and role. All of those variables that really define who you are will result in the feed being relevant to you. And then that feed surfaces in the home site, which has been brought into Microsoft Teams through the Viva Connections application, which again can be branded and customized to reflect the identity of your organization. And that feed also shows up in the feed view of the mobile application. So this is conceptually what's happening. The content is coming together into a feed. The feed is in a website. The web you called your home site. The home site is inside of Microsoft Teams and is brought into the Viva Connections mobile experience. So here are the 9 steps for getting to this state. The first is to create and designate a SharePoint home site. The home site is a modern SharePoint site that will be a host for configuration, including your dashboard and your global navigation, and can also be a source for news. So that home site will power the experience inside of Teams as well as inside of the mobile experience. One thing that I find customers get confused about is they think their entire intranet has to be on modern SharePoint to take advantage of Viva Connections. And that while that's ideal, it is definitely not required. One home site will help you go a long way with Viva Connections. So create a home site, and in that home site, you will then be able to configure your global navigation through the app bar. The app bar allows you to define the links, the hierarchy of those links, and that app bar will then drive the resources in both the desktop and mobile experiences for connection. The home site also contains your dashboard. And so from your home site, you can create and configure the cards on your dashboard. You can specify both a mobile and a desktop view of that dashboard, and you can target cards to specific audiences. So for example, you might decide that your shifts application that allows your frontline workers to clock in is targeted to frontline workers and isn't necessarily visible to information workers, for example. So create your home site, and from your home site, configure your app bar, which is your navigation, and your dashboard. Then you're ready to deploy the applications into Teams. And there's two applications you should deploy. The first is Viva Connections, which you can deploy from the Teams Admin Center, and you can choose to pin. I think a lot of customers will choose to pin it to the top of the application bar in Teams so that it is the obvious landing page in Teams. And then also deploy the Communities app, because the Communities app will bring those community experiences into Teams and will allow notifications from Teams, such as announcements, to show up inside of Teams. So you deploy those two applications from the Teams Admin Center, and then you're ready to create content. And that is something that many of you will already be familiar with. Create news in SharePoint. That news can be internally published news hosted in SharePoint itself, or you can take a link from an external news article and share it just as you would on social media as what's called a news link. And for each of those items, the news posts and the news links, you can manage audience targeting to really make sure the right people are getting the news and that you're not overwhelming audiences to whom news is not relevant. Finally, from a content perspective, start working with your communities to foster engagement and conversation in those communities, and to share announcements in those communities. Those announcements will also then accrue to the Viva Connections feed. So you've created the infrastructure, you've deployed the apps, you've created content, and now you can start measuring the reach and the impact of your work. SharePoint provides page insights. So for any news article, you can get a feeling for who it's reaching and when and how they're consuming it. And within Yammer, you've got conversation and community insights to understand engagement across communication channels with the content you're publishing through Yammer. So those are the 9 steps. There's tons of detail. I'll make sure to get you guys the slide deck, and get you all the slide deck, and you can dig in. But it is a fairly straightforward process to get going with Viva Connections and communities. It does not require a heavy lift. In fact, it just is adding and bringing together the content you've already got in Microsoft 365. So with that, I will stop and answer questions on a couple of slides about resources. I definitely wanted to point out that you're not in this alone. We have a new fast track offer that we announced at Ignite for any customer that has 150 or more seats. Our fast track team and our fast track ready partners will actually help you implement these scenarios in your organization. We'll help you turn on, light up, and deploy successfully not only Viva Connections, but also Viva Topics, Viva Insights, and Viva Learning. And the link to that is on the slide at the bottom here, aka.ms/M365RFA. And that same link is on this slide, which is where I'll leave us for a moment, that summarizes some great resources for people who want to get going with Viva Connections, with Yammer, and with Fast Track. So with this slide up, in case people want to write down these URLs, I will stop and find out if there are any questions on connections, Yammer, SharePoint, potentially any other topic. I won't say I know everything, but I can at least take a shot at some of your questions. Let's see. So I noticed Pete saying, for me, Yammer is like an internal Twitter, whereas Teams is more like internal Facebook. I would say that's not there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. The metaphors I give customers for Yammer versus Teams are a couple. First is, one metaphor is Yammer is about making the sausage. It's about the people who are coming together and putting the ingredients together and creating the sausage. Whereas Yammer is about how you talk about the sausage with the rest of the organization, how you sell the sausage, how you get feedback on the sausage, and how you get ideas about what the next great sausage is going to be. That's one metaphor that I find can be helpful. Another is this. In Teams, in a channel, conversation is about the objective of that group of people, right? They're working together towards shared objectives. You're sharing documents, you're co-collaborating, you're creating, you're managing processes. Conversation is supporting the objective of that group. In Yammer, conversation is the objective. The whole point is what you're talking about. You're sharing ideas, you're collecting feedback, you're sharing news and announcements. So that's another metaphor I really like to use, is that in teams, conversation is about the objective. In Yammer, in a community, conversation is the objective. So that's another way I can suggest talking to your folks about that. And then very importantly, helping them understand that it's not either or. It is communities and channels all inside of Microsoft Teams as a hub. So Teams is your application where you've got chats where you talk one-on-one with people or in small groups. You've got channels where you really work together on shared objectives and keep work going. And you've got communities that allow you to reach outside of your working groups and your core group of peers to share knowledge and community and news. Cameron, you got your hand up?
Yeah, thanks for that presentation, Dan. Can you speak about the Viva Connections and the cards that you demonstrated, the card flows that came through, and I think you mentioned ServiceNow. Is there a marketplace where once we get those cards up and running, there's some that come out of the box, I assume, that Microsoft provides. Is there then a store that additional ones? I believe there's a development story where we can create those in-house for line of business applications and so forth. Is there a marketplace that's going to be ready to go? Like today, is there a marketplace?
That is a great question. I can't say I know the answer perfectly to that, but I would say with about 90% certainty, there is no marketplace today. That is certainly going to happen over the fullness of time. Very much like there's marketplaces for Teams apps and others. These kinds of extensions will be made available to customers through a marketplace. So while there isn't one today, I am very confident that's on the roadmap for the team. But I have no dates or specifics to share on that at this point. A lot of the third-party cards like Workday and ServiceNow are going to be simply made available to those customers through their existing relationships with those vendors. But yeah, I would certainly anticipate at some point there'll be a marketplace for that.
Sure. And I like that you called out the ability to sort of combine what we already had with SharePoint News, especially the external links. That was going to be one of the questions I was going to ask, but then you presented it in the slide, which was great.
Yeah, that was going to be me too.
Yeah, so that's going to be a great way of curating news, not just putting the onus on people inside the company to create news or repeat news that's out there already externally available, but it will be a conduit for making that external news available, targeted to audiences, and pushing it out. So
yeah, and that's leveraging the SharePoint News link infrastructure that already exists. What we don't have in the suite today is sort of a way to automatically ingest news of a specific category or related to your organization. So that's something that as a developer you would be able to create and ingest that. And certainly over time, you've seen what we're doing in Windows 11 with news widgets. And from a conceptual perspective, we view Windows 11, Teams, Outlook, Edge, and Office as what we internally call our hubs. That's where people are going to spend most of their time. And we're trying to bring similar experiences across those hubs. So knowing that we're bringing news into Windows 11, that same infrastructure will eventually allow that to light up in other places. But today, you would be able to do that through SharePoint News links.
Just on that note, Dan, sorry, can you do that through Windows 11 today or not? That's coming, or is it planned?
Well, today you have the news widget in Windows 11.
Yep.
So today you've got external news coming into Windows 11, but you don't have SharePoint News. Today in Teams or Viva, you've got SharePoint News, but not external news. Over time, those things will rationalize, and you'll be able to get similar things across all of those endpoints.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah,
cool.
And Work's asking a great question, which is sort of the Yammer versus Teams question as related to an org-wide team. So, there's certainly a world in a really big customer where you have to have Yammer to be successful. There's also a world in a really small organization, let's say a mom and pop shop with 5 people, where you definitely don't, because you see each other and you're engaging with people all the time, and you don't need that. In the middle, there's this great gray area where, as Sue Hanley, I think it was, said, if you don't know and actively engage with everyone in your organization on a regular basis, you have to have communities to do that. And communities can technically, in a certain size, be implemented either with a channel or a team, for that matter, or a community backed by Yammer. There are two ways to approach answering this question. One is the trust me answer, which is trust me, the scenario is better done in Yammer, and that might be enough for you. The other is to really talk about how these technical services work. So I'll go geeky technical with you for a moment if it helps. And as I head into that, I'll start by saying, if you've ever gone to a Teams channel and you've tried to scroll back a couple of weeks to find something that was talked about a couple of weeks ago, you'll know how painful that is. You scroll back and it's just like it takes forever to render and it's all like, it's just like wonky. That's because Teams was built starting with individual chat. So everything in Teams, every message is an individual chat message. There's no such thing as a thread in Teams. When you see a thread, it's because the client has taken a bunch of individual messages and stitched them together and make it look like a thread, because it knows the relationship between those, but it's not actually in the data model. It's something the client is making happen. And so as you scroll back in time, it has to go fetch all those messages and pull them into the client and assemble them all together. And it's really not good at doing that. Yammer, but it's very good at helping you stay on top and connected with people in real time and getting that chat moving. Yammer was built with the complete opposite architecture. Yammer was built for top down. So when you look at a conversation in Yammer, when you look at a post or a thread in Yammer, what you see on the screen is being given to you by the service. The Yammer service only gives your client what you need to show on the screen at that time, which means whether it's one post with one reply, or whether it's a post from your CEO with 400 replies and nested replies, it's going to render just as fast, because it's the service that's giving it to you, not the client that's having to go collect all the individual messages and assemble them together. So Yammer's service is meant for longer term, potentially more complex conversation models than Teams is meant for. That also is why we're able to do nested replies, and Teams is not doing that right now. We're able to do things like Q&A with answer upvoting and soon question upvoting. So Yammer's actual product is better at supporting those kinds of scenarios from a data model perspective. The second thing that Yammer is better at is giving you a way to cut through the noise to get to the signal. Because as you have a medium to large size organization, and you go beyond your individual working group, there's going to be more happening than you'll ever be able to keep track of. No individual person should be expected to know every conversation that's happening in their organization. And so how do you find those conversations that really matter to you? It's not what was talked about most recently. And it's about sifting through those conversations and giving you an AI-powered feed that gives you the things that are most likely to be valuable for you. That is not what channels do. Channels are giving you recency. They're not giving you discovery. They're not letting you find an individual reply in a giant conversation that matters to you. So not only is the Yammer service really honed for the scenarios, but the actual end user capabilities that power the experiences are different than what a channel does, which again is really meant about real-time collaboration. So we've got these two models for communication, supporting communication, that were built for different purposes. The only thing is they just happen to look the same if you look at, there's a group of people. If you look at a group of people, it's hard to tell these two things apart. If you look at what they're trying to do, there's two very different sets of needs that are supported by two very different sets of technical requirements. So that's the long geeky answer. The short answer is, trust me, these scenarios of community building, employee communications, and knowledge sharing are better done with Yammer. Microsoft knows it. That's why Yammer actually built the new Q&A feature for Teams meetings. You won't ever know it because you'll go into a Teams meeting and it looks like Teams, but it's actually built by and powered by Yammer. So you'll start seeing that more and more. And unlike 2 years ago, inside Microsoft, we actually all know it now. We're aligned and we're working very well together. It's no longer sort of pointing guns at each other. So you'll see, you're going to see a lot more cohesive messaging and feature sets coming out over the coming months here. Long answer.
Oh, cool.
All right, and I should get off stage for Cameron here.
Is there any more questions or queries for Dan before we let him go? I'm sure it's the middle of the night where he is at the moment, so if you do, please feel free to chime in or post your question in the chat.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for those of you who braved the browser experience of Teams. This was my very first meeting that I've done entirely in the browser before, so I'm actually pretty impressed it worked. Really appreciate it. Have a great great meeting, and thank you all so much for inviting me. And hopefully, I will have a chance to come down and do this in person sometime in the not too distant future.
Thank you very much, Dan. We do really appreciate it, and once again, thank you very much for giving up your time and presenting to the group. So thank you on behalf of everyone.
Awesome. Take care, everybody.
Cheers. Thanks. And with that note, we have Cameron, who has also said that he will be presenting building apps with the Microsoft Graph Toolkit as a bit of a deep dive session. So I believe this is a bit more technical rather than high level. We'll probably be seeing some technical code or some goodies relating to it. Feel free to stay on the meeting. We'll keep going and same format as before. If you've got any questions or queries, please feel free to post them in the chat or raise your hand and we can address them as they pop up. But now I'll hand over to Cameron for his presentation. And thank you, Cameron, for hanging around and giving a presentation also.
Thank you, Dan. Pleasure to be here. Is my screen being shared okay? It's a bit hard to tell through the web version presenting through Teams. Yeah, it's coming through.
No, we're saying with the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, then it is.
It is. Thank you very much. So yeah, thank you very much. As we said, we're going to be doing a bit more of a deep dive, although I'm not assuming that anyone is a professional developer. This is more of an awareness chat about a certain technology. For those that are more as a sort of a business level, I guess it's an appreciation that this technology exists, so that as you come across business requirements, you're aware that it's there. For developers, it is a great thing to know about, to add to your toolkit, and hopefully I can position where you would use this technology and the reasons why you would use this technology. And the technology is the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. So first of all, I just want to level set with everyone because we've all got different levels coming from different backgrounds, different levels of understanding of the Microsoft Graph. To me, what the Microsoft Graph means is that it's all of the data that we're storing up in the Microsoft 365 cloud. And when I say data, I mean the typical things you'd expect, like your files that you're storing in Sharepoint and OneDrive, that's data up there. Your emails and your calendar, that's data that's up in Microsoft 365. But there's a lot of other almost incidental pieces of information that's stored up inside of the Microsoft Cloud services as well. Things like who you're collaborating with, co-authors on a document, the people that you're having meetings with, the people that you send chat messages to, all of this is data. And it's there and available for us to leverage. And many of Microsoft's own AI capabilities within their products are leveraging this data. So the Microsoft Graph is this model that Microsoft has of all of our data up there, and that's across all of the services. It's across SharePoint, it's across Exchange, Mail, and calendaring. It's across Teams, it's across your To-Do Planner. There's heaps and heaps of services, and traditionally they are what we used to have individual server products for on premises. When we went to the cloud, we sort of lost the concept of server products. But what we are sort of starting to lose now is each one of those server products had its own API that, as developers, we would program against. So if we wanted information out of Exchange, out of our mail or our calendar, we'd use some sort of Exchange API. If we wanted information out of SharePoint, we'd be using a SharePoint API to get at that. If we wanted something out of Active Directory about people and groups, it'd be an Active Directory API. So as developers, you had to learn all of these different APIs. They all had their quirks. They all worked in different ways. You had to authenticate with them in different ways. So because all of this data is now held in the cloud inside of Microsoft services, the goal here is to remove those individual service APIs and replace it with one unified API. And that is what the Microsoft Graph is. It is one unified API to get access to all of your data that lives up in the Microsoft 365 cloud. Now, the Microsoft Graph powers Microsoft's own products. And this is, as a developer, this really screams two things at me. First of all, Microsoft Graph isn't a sort of a tack-on API so that we as external third parties can come in and get access to our data. It's battle tested, it's out there being used to run Microsoft's core products every day. The Office suite uses it, SharePoint, parts of SharePoint are using it, Teams uses it. So the Graph API, it's battle tested. We know that it's reliable. If it wasn't, Microsoft would have real problems in their products. And the other thing it means to me is that when you start using a technology, you're often looking for examples of, well, what can I do with this API? What scenarios is that going to light up? And again, because Microsoft's using it in their own products, is that there's great examples inside of these products from Microsoft you're using all the time that show you examples of how to use and how to leverage that the data that's in the Microsoft Graph. And perfect example of that, which I'm sure you are all familiar with, is addressing an email in Outlook. So as soon as we go into Outlook and put our cursor in that to field to start addressing the email, we'll get a suggestion of people. That's not just the first 5 people in Active Directory. They're people that you've recently interacted with, whether it be sending an email, collaborating with somebody. You get recent people coming back. If we go a step further, and if I was to start addressing this to Jeremy, again, it's not just an alphabetical list coming back. It's Jeremy's that I work most closely to, based again on that information that's up in the Microsoft Graph. And being a unified API, and it's also a RESTful API, which means it's based on HTTP standards, and it can be leveraged or it can be called irrespective of what technology or what device I'm on. And what that allows us to do is that same experience I get addressing an email in Outlook on the desktop, I get exactly the same experience, the same results coming back using Outlook on my iPhone. If I try to search for Jeremy inside of the Teams client, or even if I try to mention someone in a comment out in Word, it's the Graph API behind that. It's the same calls being made. It's the same service returning exactly the same answers. So we're seeing more and more consistency, reuse, and that same experience no matter where you go. Now, the Graph API is what we call a people-centric API. It puts people at the center, and then it models the objects around that person. So here we're looking at me in the center, and around me we can see all the objects that the Microsoft Graph has about me, such as the files that I've saved up in SharePoint or OneDrive or my mail messages. And we can actually navigate the graph and move from one person to another. So we might do that by saying, we're having a look at me, we have a look at my mail messages. We might have a look at some of the other recipients. So this mail message has been sent to me, but it's also been sent to somebody else. And we can navigate across and change our focus on the graph to move it to that other recipient. And then I can see all the objects around that person, obviously, which I have access to. So navigating the graph is based on permissions, as any of the APIs normally would be, but you can start to move around the graph and traverse it based on moving from user to user and using these relationships and objects that are around the people. And that's not just a warm, fluffy marketing term to make us feel like we're the center of the universe. When we look at the API itself, and the structure of these API calls, when I say it's a RESTful API and it's done over the HTTP protocol, it always starts with graph.microsoft.com. That's where we call this endpoint at. And we pass authentication information to it so it knows who we are, it knows what tenancy we belong to. So we can just call this v1.0 as the production endpoint of the graph, and I can just call me, and that would return information about myself based on who I've authenticated as. If I wanted to get information from my calendar, I can just go /me/events, and they'll start bringing back events from my calendar. And obviously behind the scenes, that's going to be what was traditionally your Exchange server. That's where you would have had to have gone to get calendar information. If we wanted to get to my OneDrive, I can just go /me/drive, and then I can start navigating my OneDrive. And behind the scenes, OneDrive is powered by the Sharepoint service. So here we have this Graph API being able to get at both calendar data and your OneDrive data, which traditionally would have been two totally separate APIs that you would have needed to interact with. This is the structure that those URLs follow. We'll quickly step through them. Being a RESTful API, we have get operations, which go and fetch us data, let us read data out of the graph. We have post operations, which allow us to put new or create new objects up inside of the graph. We have patch operations, which allow us to change existing data that's in there, and we can delete information out as well. There's two endpoints. So one of those first things where it said version 1.0, that is the production endpoint. But there's also another one which is /beta, and if we put that in our URL, it's almost like an alternate version of the graph where new functionality comes through. New like objects or new properties on objects will land there first, and we can start coding against those. We can provide Microsoft with feedback, and that beta endpoint is sort of in flux. When it solidifies and it's guaranteed not to change, it moves into that v1.0 version of the graph. Then we have the resources, and we saw on that previous slide, we could just use /me to return information about ourselves. That's our user profile, if you like. We can use /users to go and find users in the Active Directory for this tenancy. /groups, again, to look through the groups in Active Directory. Things like /sites gets you to SharePoint, /drives gets you to OneDrive. We saw /events gets us to our calendar. So there's many, many resources or data sets that are available inside of the graph. Once you're inside one of these data sets, such as the users coming back from Active Directory, the next section is the ID, or how to identify one of the users to bring back. Now that could be via their email address or their name. Once you're inside of one of the objects, you're then navigating the properties of the objects. So no matter what sort of data set we're navigating, this navigation metaphor holds true. And there are certain you can sort of get to certain points where you're starting to navigate across. This is that sort of traversing the graph that I was talking about earlier, because I could go /me/events to get my own calendar, but I could say /users/John, and once I'm at John, I've now navigated across the graph to another user. I can have a look at John's events again if I have permission to them by saying /users/John/events. And throughout all of this, when we're trying to find information, there's also a standard for querying as well. So if I'm looking at John's calendar, rather than just get all of the events out of John's calendar, I can start to query for certain events to almost search and filter for events to bring back. So this is giving us one unified metaphor to go across all the data that's stored up in the Microsoft 365 cloud. And I guess what data, the next logical question is, well, what data is up there that I can get my hands on and can take advantage of? And these are the super popular data sets that you would expect to be up there. But what's not immediately evident is that there are hundreds and hundreds of data sets available through the Graph API. And this number is growing all of the time. And this is because Microsoft internally for years now has been on this drive to use the Microsoft Graph as its primary API for its own internal products, and to expose that once that they're using it internally themselves, it's also available for us externally. So more and more of those individual, those server APIs are fading away and being deprecated, and that's same data sets are being lit up inside of the Microsoft Graph API. So one of the best ways to really see what data sets are available is to use this website, which is Microsoft Graph Explorer. I've got a slide that I'll share at the end that has links to all of this, so don't worry too much about how I got here. But this is just a website that you can punch into your browser, and it allows you to log in as your Microsoft 365 tenancy. And then what you can actually do is execute queries against the graph, and this will return real data from your Microsoft 365 tenant. So here I've just done a /me call, and that's returned my basic profile data, my name, my email. If I want to get my mail, here's this /me/messages that will go and return messages from my inbox. And here they are down the bottom. Now there's a lot of information coming back here, and believe it or not, that is just the information from one single email. But what I might do is I'll show you those query parameters here. Rather than it returning all the properties for an email, I'll just tell it to bring back the subject of the emails. Now it's a bit easier to read. You can see here it's bringing back the ID and the subject. So these are email messages that are sitting in my mailbox being read out of that tenant at real time. So we can use this website to poke around and see what data is available and what it responds with, what properties are available to us. Down the left-hand side here, there are sample queries. So that's how I quickly got to my profile and my mail. But what you'll notice is there's lots of different data sets here, things to do with Excel, things to do with Teams, things to do with Microsoft To Do. And this is just a subset. It's by no means exhaustive. And next to each one of these, I just wanted to go to the SharePoint one. Next to each one of these, you'll see that there's a link out here. And this goes to the Microsoft Docs, which gives you a more exhaustive list of all of the operations and examples of how you can interact with that data set. So this one, for example, it's /sites, which gets us to the SharePoint data, root, which is the root site collection for this tenancy, and lists. So this is giving us back essentially all the lists in the root site collection for the tenant. All right, so that was a quick introduction, but that's the best way to go and start finding out what data is available to you through this API. So up until now, we've just been talking about the data that's sitting up in the Microsoft 365 Cloud, your data in Microsoft 365 Cloud. We've talked about the Microsoft Graph API, which is calling these URLs, these structured URLs, to query and return that data. The next, and I guess there's absolutely nothing stopping you from developing software that uses those raw HTTP calls and bring the data back. But what you will find is that you end up writing a lot of generic plumbing code, such that every one of those requests that goes out has to have authentication details associated with it to authenticate the user. Being web-based technology, there's outages, sometimes you have network connectivity issues, and you have to retry them. So there's this error handling code that needs to be written. And these days, when we're developing software, when we issue the data out and it comes back, it's really just text-based information. And we want to translate that text-based information into objects that have properties around them, so it's strongly typed when we're coding. And what you will find is if you're doing the Graph API yourself, you're basically coding up these data, these data structures of what, say, when we made a me call, that person object that comes back, you would end up creating an object that models a person with those properties on it so that you can interact with it in your code. So if we abstract things up a level from the Graph API to the Graph SDK, is that this is a lot of what the Graph SDKs do. These are language specific, so you'll get one for .NET, you get one for JavaScript, you get one for Java. There's a few other languages that they have SDKs for as well. But what that does is it does all of that sort of plumbing for you. So it will take care of the authentication, adding it onto the request for you, the retrying of the requests, compressing the requests, and it gives you these request and response objects that you don't have to code them up yourself. So you can achieve what you could have achieved just using Graph API directly. You achieve it with far fewer lines of code. And that gets me to the thing that I really wanted to talk about today, which was the Graph Toolkit. So the Graph Toolkit is taking that level of abstraction one level further. It's allowing you to achieve more with those data sets in far fewer lines of code. And the Graph API and the Graph SDK are really based at a data level, requesting data and processing the response that comes back. What's different with the Graph Toolkit is these provide actual widgets of functionality that have UI rendering associated with them as well. The easiest way to explain these is to actually see some of the components on the screen. So the way we describe the Graph Toolkit is it's a collection of framework agnostic web components that are powered by the Microsoft Graph. Let's step through that. They're web components, so that means that these can be used in web projects. So anything that is fundamentally an application that's displaying in a browser or something that hosts a browser window. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript at the end of the day. But it doesn't matter. They're framework agnostic. So it doesn't matter if you're just using like vanilla HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, or if you're using a full-blown framework like React, Angular, Vue, you can use the Microsoft Graph Toolkit in any of those frameworks. So yes, whole widgets of functionality. So something like a login control that will handle allowing users to sign in, prompting them for all the sign-in flow, multi-factor authentication if they've got it set up, and then showing a nice little a control that shows the user who they're logged in as, the avatar, and the ability to log out. That people picker control, similar to what we saw in Outlook. If you want that inside of your application, you can get it quickly and easily. Okay, so let's have a look at one of the quickest ways to find your feet with the Microsoft Graph Toolkit and the components that are available. And similar to the Microsoft Graph Explorer website, there is a Microsoft Graph Toolkit Playground website. Now, down the left-hand side of this website, it has all of the components that are inside of the toolkit. And I'll just walk you through a couple here to start with so you can get a flavor for how this site works. So what we're seeing as I select through here, these different components, these are just different ways that you can use them. And I'll walk you through exactly how we do that. So over on the right-hand side here, this is the actual source code. And as I change this, you'll notice it's re-rendering. So what we've got here on this page is the MGT. You'll see this abbreviation a lot. This stands for Microsoft Graph Toolkit. So we're looking at the agenda component. Now, this is all the HTML that needs to be put on a page in order to render the user's calendar. So this knows who that we're logged in as, and it's showing events off the user's calendar. And then there's a few properties we can set here. So if we say group by day, that's what's responsible for breaking these entries up and actually displaying a header for which day they belong to. But there's a few properties that you can specify. So here, these are grouping by day. It's showing a date. So the start date is back in 2019, and it's showing 3 days worth of information. Okay, so really quick and easy, we can start bringing Microsoft Graph data into an existing application with just a couple of lines of really simple HTML code. Now, as I say, these controls are bound to a data set. So this agenda control is clearly bound to our calendar data that's stored in Microsoft 365. So that's an agenda component. The other one I want to quickly show you, which is really useful, is a people control. So here it's just showing, again, it's called the MGT people, Microsoft Graph Toolkit people control. By default here, it's just showing 5 people, and it's not a random 5 people, but it's the 5 people that the graph thinks I collaborate with the most. We can simply change the number here and show 2 people. But what is more useful and is easy to conceive of is inside of your application, I'm sure there's people involved, whether they be authors of things, they're assignees, they're owners, whatever they might be inside of your application. Wouldn't it be great if you could show the picture of them inside of your application? And here, it just shows you how easy that is, just using this MGT people control. And then there's a people's query. And what we have here is a heap of users, some mentioned by their email address, some just by their name. If I was to take some of these out, so we've got a Joni there. So that's showing a user. I know there's an Adele in this tenancy. So if I was just to write Adele, there's Adele coming through. So a great way just to get the user's avatar into your application. But it's far more than that. Look what happens when I click on these avatars. All of this functionality just basically comes for free when you start using the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. Not only do we get information about the user, but we can email the user, we can call the user, we can start a Teams conversation, we can see files that they've been working on. We've got all this powerful information. Now, I should say this is customizable as well. You don't have to give these full cards of information. You can just have a pop-up card with more information about the user. You have the option to show these actions, and you can actually customize what you see in these cards as well. So really, really powerful to be able to add this functionality into your applications. So here's all the components that exist today. We have a login component. We have a person component, which is really, when we saw the people component, we saw that little avatar. It's really one on their own, or the people allows you to combine multiple in different ways. The person card is what we saw when I clicked on it. We saw all those different actions available and all the information regarding one person. We have the people picker, which is similar to the Outlook addressing control. We have a Teams channel picker, which allows us to select teams we're a member of and then channels within those teams. We've got the agenda, which shows our calendar. We have tasks, which will show us tasks across Planner. We have a control that will show our to-do. And the newest additions are a file and a file list component, which show renditions of either files, or the file list one, you can actually point at Sharepoint or OneDrive and get a nicely formatted directory structure back with the files, the file sizes, and the right icons to match the file extensions. All right, next demo, we are going to create our very first Graph Toolkit powered application. And for this, I'm going to dive into Visual Studio Code. It is a bit of code, but I'm just going to walk through this, and this is all there is. There's one file here. It's just a simple HTML file. There's nothing else in this directory, so this is all we're going to walk through. The first few lines of code here are really just defining this as a HTML document. And in the head of this document, we are loading in a script. Now this script, MGT loader, is the Microsoft Graph Toolkit library, if you like. By loading that in, that's what makes the Microsoft Graph Toolkit available to us. And then in the body of this HTML document, I'm going to take a couple of lines out there. We must do one thing before we can start using the components. And that one thing that we must do is that we have to use a Microsoft Graph Toolkit provider. Now, provider is not very explanatory of what this thing actually does, but what it does is it gives our app its identity. What I mean by that is that this Graph Toolkit is going to be connecting back in on our behalf to our data that's stored inside of Microsoft 365. And to do that, our application is going to need some sort of consent. And now you may have experienced this when an application pops something up and it says, hey, this application is going to go and get your calendar data or your email data. Are you okay, or do you give consent for this application to go and read your mail to do this? And it's this provider that really provides that linkage back for that security and that identity of the application to take place. So what I'm not showing here, just in the interest of time, is this client ID. It matches inside of Active Directory. I've created what's called an application registration. Now, this is nothing more than going into Azure Active Directory and say, I want to create an application, and you give it a name. And what Azure Active Directory does when you register that app is it gives you an ID back. And it says, okay, here's the ID of that application. Now, when I go and start trying to do things with that in code here, and we start trying to ask for information, by providing this client ID, that is what allows the application to pop up a prompt and say, hey, to the user, are you okay with this application? It goes and reads the application's details out of Active Directory. It says, this is who produces, this is who created this application, this is the author behind it, and this is what this application wants to do. So it simply provides the identity. And there's nothing secret about this. This is public information. This isn't how security works. This is just providing the identity. So once we've got that in place, we can then start using the Microsoft Graph Toolkit components. And this first one that we're using is, I'm just going to drop a login component into our page. I'm now running this locally, and you can see that we now have, this is the login component. And in fact, because I was already in a Microsoft website over here, it's picked up my identity because I've already logged into the browser. It's brought through my avatar and some details of me from my user profile and given me the ability to sign out. Now, that to a developer is the first stumbling block I always find people have whenever they try to use pretty much any API. Because before they can get at data to do what they really want to do, they've got to deal with authentication, because no API will let you get data, especially user data, out without authenticating first. And that's quite complex if you had to develop it on your own. You've got to build UI elements, there's visual elements there, you've got to prompt the user, you've got to understand all of these flows. But the Microsoft Graph Toolkit is taking care of that for us with 2 lines of code. A bit further. Let's introduce the people picker. Again, one more line of code. Go back to the browser. All of a sudden, we have a type ahead people picker control. So that was really simple. Let's go one step further. We'll use the task component, which is bound to our planner data. So here, it's returning all of the tasks that are assigned to me across all my different plans. And this isn't just a read-only rendition. I can actually change the status of these. I can reassign them. I can even go and add new tasks as well and choose the plan that I want it to create it in and assign it. And all this is, it's using the API, but if I went into Planner, this is actually making updates and we're really changing data. So really powerful components that you can get up and using in your applications really quickly. Now, when I see a piece of technology like this, I'm often skeptical of being locked in. And what I mean by that is, you can imagine as a developer, you're engaging with a business or a part of the business with the requirements, and they've got a requirement. You think, oh great, I know I can use the Microsoft Graph Toolkit because there's components in here that I can bring together, and I can give the business what they want really, really quickly. But what happens when you deliver that to the business and they say, that's great, that's exactly what we asked for, but now that we see it, those colors don't really match our branding, and those fonts are wrong, so we just need you to change that as well. And can we just move that around? That information's in the wrong order. We'd much rather that be on top. And now as a developer, you could think, well, this isn't great because I pretty much got all this for free and I got it done really quickly. But now that they want to change some things, because I didn't create it in the first place, do I have to throw all of this away and start again? And I'm glad to say that there's quite a few things that they've built into the Microsoft Graph Toolkit to hopefully mean that you don't find yourself in that situation. The first one is custom styling is supported and it's expected. So all of the properties and styles that the Graph Toolkit components use it's based on Microsoft's Fluent UI design. So it renders great, which I haven't set up until this point, but those components, they render perfectly across different devices. They're accessible, but all of it you can override, and they're designed to bring your own styling across. Another thing is the templates themselves. So the way that these components work, even though we're only dropping one HTML element onto our web page, something like that planner task coming back. When you think about that, there's a query going off to planner. It's bringing back a whole heap of tasks, and every task is creating effectively a row on the screen inside of our document. But each one of those items that comes back, what's really happening is that at runtime, as the element comes back, there's a whole heap of HTML, CSS being stamped out for that row to actually render. And what that's using is internally within the component, it's using what's called a default template. So it's saying for every row that comes back, here's what I want you to output, and here's where I want you to bind the data that's come back into this little snippet of HTML template. But you can bring your own template. So that means that for those tasks that were coming back from Planner, if you don't want to see half the information, then just bring your own template to lay it out the way you want it, change the order of it, and just bind to the information you want. Or maybe you want to bind to more information that the default one is not displaying, and you can do that as well. And the last two sort of get out of jail free components or pieces that are available inside the Microsoft Graph Toolkit to avoid this lock-in, I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail on these coming slides. So the first one is MGT Get. Now this one's vastly different to the other components that are inside of the toolkit. When we talk about the majority of those components inside of the toolkit, what's common to them is that they're bound to a specific data set within the Microsoft Graph. So the agenda is bound to your calendar. The task is bound to your planner tasks. What's different about the MGT Get is that it's not bound to any specific data set inside of the graph. And because it's not bound to any particular data set, it also doesn't provide that default template or that rendition because it doesn't know what data you're going to query for. So let's just walk through how it works here, and hopefully that'll solidify the idea for you. So in this first line, this MGT Get, we're specifying a resource. Now this resource is really a query, much like in that Graph Explorer website, where we were poking around what's available up in the Graph API. That's exactly that query that we're putting in that URL. That's exactly what this is expecting. It's saying, well, what data do you want to query for? And so we can just go out to the Graph Explorer website, figure out what that information is that we want returned, and plonk it in here. And the MGT Get will go and fetch that data for us. Here, the version is saying whether you want to hit the production endpoint or the beta. The scopes is an interesting one because everything inside of the Microsoft Graph has permission scopes associated to it. So if we wanted to query for a user's email messages, we need the mail.read scope. Now, the Microsoft Graph Toolkit has this capability built in that if the user has not consented for our application to read your mail messages, then when it goes to execute this MGT Get, it will stop the user on your website. It will pop up a box and say, hey, do you consent for this application to go and read your mail messages? If they consent to it, then it will continue off and it will go and fetch this data for us. As a developer, we don't have to write any of that prompting code. So that takes care of going and fetching the data. And then when the data comes back, because this MGT Get has no idea of what data you will fetch, it doesn't have that default template to bind the data to and render it on the screen. And so that's what this first template, this of data type value does, is it's going to repeat this HTML and stamp it out for every one of those email messages that comes back from the query. And here we're just wrapping it in a div so we can apply some styling, and we're using a heading here. And this double braces syntax is our data binding syntax. So we can put in here any property that comes back off these messages that are returned. So we're just going to insert the subject in here. So that's our template. And then there's two other templates down here. One is data type loading, and that just gives you the ability to specify some HTML that you would like to show on your page while the data is being fetched. And the other one is an error template. So what would you like to show if there's been some issue with making this call? And we can actually use the this object to show the content of that email, that error message back to the user. So we can hopefully show them something meaningful. So it's not hard to imagine. We could get an output like this showing us our email entries. We just in our custom template that we had there, we were just bringing back the subject and binding that. But if we bound the from and the email preview, which is another property that comes back, we could quite easily get this layout coming back, or get the MGT query output to be this. Now, let's just think about what that's enabled, what this has enabled. We've just used the MGT get to return and display our email messages, and there was no component inside of the Microsoft Graph Toolkit that showed email messages. So what this actually allows you to do using MGT get is this now allowing you to get access to any data set that's inside of the Microsoft Graph API. Those hundreds and hundreds of data sets that are available, you can now get at as easily as I've just shown on that slide. So that is super, super powerful in being able to give you access to this information quickly and easily. And the last get out of jail free card is what are called the providers. And a provider allows us to step back. Let me explain that slightly differently. If I rewind a few slides, and I talked about the levels of abstraction, we had the Graph API, the Graph SDKs, and then the Graph Toolkit. The Graph SDKs are the Microsoft Graph Toolkit is really an additional layer on top of those others. So the Microsoft Graph Toolkit actually uses a Microsoft Graph SDK. It uses the JavaScript Graph SDK client underneath the covers. We just don't see it, but it's there, and we can get a handle on it. So what I mean by that is, on your page, is that if at any time we need more power than the Graph Toolkit provides us with, then we can use providers, global provider.graph.client. This gives us a handle on the JavaScript Graph SDK client. It's already ready to go. The toolkit is actually using it. So as long as we've got a login component on our page somewhere, if we're logged in, we can just start executing calls. So this would, by calling that Graph SDK client.api me, that's the equivalent of a /me call. That would return my user details. There's nothing more I have to do, just that line of code. All right, in the next 10 minutes, we are going to build an entire application and not cut too many corners. Using the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, we're going to use that MGT get component, and we're going to use that provider to step back down to the Graph SDK as well. So for that, I am going to do a tiny bit of cleanup of Windows here so we don't get confused. Well, I don't get confused. Okay, we'll close those things down. We don't need that anymore. And we're going to start this demo out in SharePoint. I will just get some code up on the screen as well. Okay. All right, so we start in SharePoint. Let's paint a picture here, the scenario for this one. At Camtoso, we sell, what do we sell? We sell fashion and sporty goods online. And when people buy things online, the orders come through and they end up in this SharePoint list. That's our orders here. So you can see we've got 4 orders. There's an order number, and we've got a status column here. We've got some that are ready for packing, some that are requested, and we have where we've got to ship them off to, the total number of items that were purchased. In the order manifest here, we have the exact items that we need to pack into those boxes ready for delivery, and we've got the contact's name. Now, we have packers down in the warehouse. Now, these packers are responsible for taking these orders, walking around the warehouse floor, finding the goods that need to be put into a box, put them into that box, and tape it up and get it ready for delivery. So what we want to do is we want to build a lightweight application that these packers can use down on the warehouse floor. They can use it on a tablet or a mobile device. We just want a simple web page that's going to allow them to see these orders and yeah, they can carry around with them. So we need to make this information clearly available to them. All right, let's jump over to the code. Now, this might look a little bit scary, but this is all the code that I'm going to use. I'm not even going to scroll this page. So we're going to build our whole application, and I'm just going to walk you through it. Now, what the green code here is commented out at the moment, so that won't execute for now. And let's have a look at this code. So these first few lines, HTML and head, that's just generic HTML code. The next one, we're loading in that MGT loader, so that is loading in the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, exactly as we did in the last demo. That's the end of the head. Now we start the body of the of this page, and we're using again that the MSAL provider, that stands for Microsoft Authentication Library. We're using the MSAL provider, and we're providing the client ID, which gives our application its identity. And that is actually the same identity we used in the last demo. So down until here, it's identical. And then we're using the MGT login component. We saw that in the last demo as well. So nothing's changed. Down to line 9 here, it is the first demo. So the only thing we've really introduced here that's different is this MGT get, and it's just one MGT get component. Now the structure of this should look familiar from that slide. We've got a resource up the top where we're specifying what we want to get back from SharePoint. And really, I'm just pointing at that orders list. And the way I came up with this query is I use the Graph Explorer website. So we're calling the graph, we're calling the production endpoint, we're calling sites, which gets us to SharePoint. We use the SharePoint domain, and inside of that, it's not the root site that we're after, but we're diving down inside of a subsite called warehouse. And inside of the warehouse site, we want the lists. This is the ID of the orders list. And inside of that, we want the items that are in the orders list. I've got to expand here because I want it to return all of those fields, the SharePoint columns, because we're going to need those. And I also want to apply a filter. I want a filter where the status field is equal to ready for packing. I've got to provide a scope here because I want to make sure that users consented. Because I'm calling SharePoint, that's a sites.read.all permission that I need. And the other interesting one that I'll point out here is a polling rate. You don't have to specify this. Without it, it would just execute once, bring the data back, render it. But I want to, with this polling rate, it's going to re-execute this query. And here it's going to be every 5 seconds. And if the data's changed when this query comes back, it'll take care of re-rendering the output for us and displaying it. And the reason I'm doing that is if our packers have got this application, this page open on their device, I don't want them having to keep hitting the refresh button at the top of the page to know if new orders have come in. If we can periodically refresh it, those orders will just show up for them. Okay, so we're going to query that SharePoint list, and when the data comes back, this is the template that we're going to use to do that data binding and that display. So we're using a div on the outside of it just so we can apply some styling. So this represents our order. And then inside of that, we have an order header. And in there, we're going to use the title, which is the actual order number. We're going to use the contact's name to place the order. Inside the body of this, we're going to show the order manifest. That's all those line items that the packer's got to put in the box. And then in the footer, we're just going to give them a total count of the items. So it's easy for them to see. I'm supposed to pack 5 items. There's 5 items in that box. We're good to go. The next line's commented out, so we'll ignore that. And then down here, we've just got the loading template, just going to simply show the word loading. And we've got the error template, in which case we're just going to show the error message that's provided to us. That's all there is. So let's save that and we'll host that locally. Let's see what happens. Okay, we've got our sign-in component. Excellent. And we've got some data. This is looking good. Well, it looks a little ugly, but it's good that we got data back. If we look here, we've got order chem001 and order chem002. If we look at our SharePoint site, chem001, that was ready for packing. Great. Chem002, that was ready for packing. Great. We didn't get these 2 orders, and that's because the status didn't match. So this looks good. It looks like our query is working. One other thing I want to check is I'll just pop open some dev tools here. You might find this hard to view because of the size of it. But what I wanted to just point out here is more, you see how this is popping in? What this is actually showing is the network activity because every 5 seconds it's going out and calling SharePoint again. So it looks like our polling is working as well. Awesome. Let's go back to the code and make one small change. I'm going to include a style sheet, which just provides some styling. So it makes it easier for us to view what's going on here. Okay, I'm no styling guru, but that's easier for me to read. We can now see that we've got little cards. that show us the orders. So this is pretty good. We're connecting to SharePoint. This is what the packer would see on their device. They can go around and they can pick up these items, but we then need them to be able to mark this thing off to change the status back in SharePoint to say, hey, this thing's been packed. So let's jump back out here. Now to do that, there is no component, as we've found, there's no components inside the toolkit to even get data out of SharePoint. So there's definitely not going to be any components that know to update a specific status column in SharePoint. So we're going to have to do that ourselves. We can't use an MGT get component because that's used for getting and querying information for us. So we're going to have to step back to the underlying Graph Sdk client. Let me show you how easy that is. First of all, we're going to create a button. I'm going to do that inside of the template because we want a button on each one of those cards so that they can click off which one they've actually packed. So I'm going to put a button, we're going to put some text on it saying mark as packed, and we're going to create a function called change status to packed. I'm just going to pass in a reference to the button they've clicked. And here, because we're still in the template, we can use any of the properties that have come back off that item from SharePoint. So the ID is the ID, the SharePoint item ID, and we're going to need that because when we go back to SharePoint to update the item, we need to know its ID. Okay, so that's going to get us our button, and then we need to actually write this function to give it some functionality when they actually click on that button. So down here in this script block is where we do that. Now, first thing we need to do is we need to get a handle on that Microsoft, the Graph Sdk client. So like I showed in the slide deck, we can simply do that by going providers.globalprovider.graph.client. We now have our Graph Sdk client. I've done that outside the function because we only need to grab the Graph Sdk client once. Putting it here will grab it as the page is loading up, and we don't need to get it every time we click the button. Okay, so now we're inside of the button. What do we want to do when the button is clicked? We can just simply call the Graph Sdk client now, and we just specify the API. So again, I crafted this out in the Graph Explorer website. We're going back, same site, same list, its ID, same items, but this time /item ID. Here's the item. So we know which item the user's clicked on. We passed it through here. It comes down. We can use the item ID, and we want to update the fields on that item. Down here, we pass in the scope. This time we asked for read write all up the top here when we queried read write all. Now we need, we asked for read all. Now we need read write all. We want to make sure the user's happy for us to update data in SharePoint as well. And what do we want to update? We want to change the status to packed. And I'm also just changing the class on this from a styling perspective. What this will actually do is when the user clicks on the button, it'll actually make the card disappear so they get instant feedback that something has happened. The reason I wanted to do that is because we don't need to get complex and try to take the card off the web page, because that polling is going to take care of this for us. Because if we think of what we've just done here, is the query got the cards there to start with on our page. Then we're going to go back using Graph API and change the status of one of these items in SharePoint. And within 5 seconds, this polling will take care of re-querying and re-rendering the results. So it should take that card away for us without us having to write that code. So let's go and see if that's the case. Hey, look here, we've got a button, mark as packed. If I click on one of these, the button immediately disappears, and then within 5 seconds, it's gone. In SharePoint, I'm not even sure if SharePoint's that smart. We might have to refresh SharePoint. We can see that Chem002 is packed. This is pretty cool. Let's go and change one of the status of one of these items. So it's not requested anymore. Let's change it so that it's ready for packing. I'm going to change this one as well because this is fun. Now, if I'm quick, no, wasn't quick enough. It's already refreshed and those orders are available for us. We can run around the warehouse. We can pack the glow sticks, pack the mesh glasses, pack the whistle. Someone's up for a good night. We've got all those in the box. We click on it, and then it's going to update SharePoint. It's going to refresh and it moves away. All right, so that concludes the demo. But I guess what I wanted to do here is just take stock of what we've managed to achieve. We've used the Microsoft Graph Toolkit in, well, less than 40 lines of code. I've got some blank lines of code in there. We've securely authenticated a user using a login, logout control to SharePoint, which there is no toolkit component for. We've managed to keep a website in sync dynamically when items come into a SharePoint list. We've allowed the user to then also update items in SharePoint when they want to do it. And we've done that all in one page of code. that's actually been magnified so we can see it across a remote session. So super powerful to get real things happening. And we're not cutting any corners here. We're using accessible controls. And yeah, it's just super powerful. This toolkit is awesome. So I think it's pretty evident why to use this graph toolkit. It's going to allow you to do things much faster than having to develop it yourself. The components that come those fully built components that come out of the box, those ones that we were sort of in the playground area, they're fully accessible, they're flexible, they're going to look and function great, and you can use this no matter what JavaScript framework you're developing with. All right, that's all I have to share with you today. These are my details. If you'd like to connect with me or follow me, I am active on LinkedIn and Twitter. I have a blog site where I share a lot of information around Microsoft 365 development topics in general. If you'd like to learn more about the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, the best resource I can point you towards is the Microsoft Learn. There is actually a new module that is dedicated to the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. And the next one is probably a lap around the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, which was a 16 article series that I authored a few of the documents that are inside of that, a few of the articles, and that really goes through the Microsoft Graph Toolkit very much from introductory, what is it, through each of the components, how to use them, different techniques as well. The Graph Explorer website we use, the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, the Microsoft Playground site that I use, there's links there. And that entire last demo that I did is all available as a GitHub repository and walks you through everything that we've done here today. All right. I am open for questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Cam on what we've seen today or Microsoft Graph in general? I think everyone's all good. I think you've covered off all the topics pretty well. I mean, it's a pretty great platform and very easy to use, the MGT. So yeah, it's a very great platform to use. So if anyone's got any questions, feel free to let Cam know.
Cool.
All right. I think we're all good.
Awesome.
Cool. Thank you very much for that, Cam. It's well, here we go to access. Oh, sorry, teams. Here we go. To access any info from SharePoint, you need the app ID created initially. Does it mean that the app ID becomes critical from a security point of view?
Yes, so the security side of this is in Azure Active Directory, an application registration is created. Now, if you're building an application that's just used within your own organization, then that's what we call a single tenant application. And the only tenancy or users only from your tenant would be able to access that. And the way the security works, the Microsoft Graph Toolkit is hiding a lot of the implementation details of that away. But there's an authentication flow, and it's really ensures that the application that you registered, like this, because it's a web-based technology, this website has to be hosted somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So we were seeing if I step back, I was hosting this locally on a local host. That means it's serving off my machine. When you actually go to deploy this, there would be some location, some URL where you're hosting this web application. Now, when you do your application registration, the way that the security works is you tell that application registration what the URL is that you're hosting this application at. And when the user goes through the login process, it will only pass the authenticated user's details back to that trusted URL that you're hosting your application at. You do that at a HTTPS address using SSL or TLS. And so that gives you a secure conduit to make sure that Azure Active Directory is not going to give the identity back to any sort of application that's trying to pretend to be who you are. And that's why it's safe to put the client ID in, because that's just telling Azure Active Directory, well, this is the client that's asking for a user to log in, but it's the actual registration in Azure Active Directory that will give the information back to that URL you've registered with the application.
Yep. So that in essence, the client ID isn't essentially sensitive information.
Correct. Yes.
Yep. No, fantastic. Does anyone else have any questions or queries at all? I think everyone's all satisfied.
Awesome.
Excellent. So thank you very much for that, Cam. Very fantastic and in-depth presentation on that. The MTG or MGT is certainly worthwhile checking out and looking at. As you said, it's very smooth and very easy to integrate. It's not a big task to do. So yes, thank you very much. If anyone's got any questions about what they've seen today or queries, feel free to reach out. I'm sure Cam and also Dan is more than happy to field any questions or queries that they have. So yes, with that, I'll just reshare my screen. Is that coming through? Just making sure.
Yes.
Yep. Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Cam. Much appreciated. Just looking forward to next year. We've got Pen Lewin from Microsoft as well, and Will Wakeland going to present. We're going to announce the topic soon. We're still deciding that. So that will certainly be coming up shortly in the newsletter, and we'll see where that comes from there. So if anyone, there we go. It's doing that again. There we go. All right. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining today's session. And I do apologise for the technical difficulties we did have with the Microsoft Teams toolbar outage. But I have got the session recorded, and I'll be posting it and sending out the newsletter. As I said, if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out and contact our speakers. There's not a problem with that. And we shall be in contact soon, as this is the last meeting for 2021, given that it would put us pretty much next to Christmas if we did have a meeting next month. So given the third Tuesday, we'll regroup on February, I think it is the 15th from memory. And we shall touch base and see everyone then. So thank you very much, everyone.